Basic English Grammar, Lesson 3. Topic: The simple past tense. Part 1. Recognizing and understanding the simple past tense. Watch and listen. I want something to eat. Maybe candy. I'll just take one piece. Yeah. Oh, but there's an apple. Okay, I'll put this back, and I'll eat the apple, not the candy. Reading. The following text describes what you saw in the video. Can you find all the verbs in the simple past tense? What happened in the video? Jennifer was at the kitchen table. She wanted to eat something. First, she thought about eating candy. She opened the candy jar in front of her and took out a piece. Now take a moment and try to find the verbs in the simple past tense. Do you see them? Here they are. Happened, was, wanted, thought, opened, took. Let's go on to the second half of the text. Then she looked at the apple. In the end, she didn't eat the candy. She put it back and ate the apple. That was a good choice. As before, I want you to find the verbs in the simple past tense. Do you see them? Let me show you. The verbs in the simple past are looked, didn't eat, put, ate, was. How did you do? Were you able to find them all? Don't worry if you found the first exercise a little difficult. I'm going to show you all the forms that the simple past tense can use. Then in the future, it will be easier for you to recognize it. So now we'll turn our attention to the forms and meanings of the simple past tense. We'll look at the verb to be, regular verbs, and irregular verbs. In the simple past tense, the verb to be has two forms, was and were. Was is used with singular nouns, uncountable nouns, and the pronouns I, she, he, and it. Examples: I was hungry. She was in the kitchen. There was candy in the jar. Candy is an example of an uncountable noun. The apple was a good choice. This is an example of a singular noun. Were is used with plural nouns, compound subjects, and the pronouns you, we, and they. Examples: you were hungry. The apple and candy were on the table. Apple and candy being a compound subject. There were many pieces of candy in the jar. Pieces is an example of a plural noun. We often use the verb to be in the simple past tense to tell about a past event, state, or condition. Examples: Jennifer was at the kitchen table. She was hungry. All of this happened in the past. All of this was true in the past. I'm telling you about my location and how I was feeling. I was at the kitchen table. I was hungry. Okay, now that we've covered the verb to be, we're going to talk about all the other verbs. We'll group them into regular verbs and irregular verbs. In the simple past, regular verbs end in ed. Can you identify the regular verbs from the text? There are 6 verbs highlighted in orange. Can you find the 3 regular verbs? They are wanted, opened, and looked. These verbs are easier to recognize and use once you know the spelling rules. Here are the spelling rules for forming regular verbs. Rule 1. Add ed to a verb that ends in a consonant. Examples. Want ends in T, so we get wanted. Look ends in K, so we have looked. Rule 2. If a verb ends in consonant, vowel, consonant, double the last consonant before adding ed. Stop is a good example. It ends in TOP, consonant, vowel, consonant. So we're going to double the P and then add ed, and we get stopped. There are a couple of exceptions to rule number 2. First, don't double the consonants W, X, Y. For example, in fixed, we only write one X. The second exception is with unstressed syllables. Don't double the last consonant if the last syllable is unstressed. For example, in open, the stress is on the first syllable, so you do not double the N. Rule 3. Add only D to a verb that ends in E. For example, we'll add D to like and get liked. Rule 4. If a verb ends in Y, change the Y to an I and then add ed. For example, the verb carry. Before we add ed, we change the Y to an I and then we get carried. There's one exception to Rule 3. That's when there's a vowel before Y. For example, in play, we have A before Y. We will not change the Y to an I. We'll simply add ed, played. Now look at the irregular verbs from the text. Can you identify the infinitive for each verb? Example, Jennifer was at the kitchen table. What's the infinitive? To be. Now it's your turn. Number 1. She thought about eating candy. The infinitive? To think. 2. She took out a piece. The infinitive? To take. 3. She put it back in the jar. The infinitive? To put. 4. She ate the apple. What's the infinitive? To eat. Now, irregular verbs can be tricky. There are a lot to remember. Most grammar books have a list of irregular verbs in the back. You can also look online. Just do a search using the keywords irregular verbs in English. End of Part 1. Please go on to the next part of this lesson.